So with that, let's kick into this. And I think Will has raised his hand to answer the first of these questions.
Thanks, Peter. So yeah, it looks like our first question is about NodeCon. And the particular question is, will NodeCon be a single event or will there be multiple NodeCons in multiple locations? And following that, if there is only one event, can you hold it somewhere warm and sunny? So the answer to that question is, that's still being decided. So input from the community is one reason why we're doing these webinars, and this is an excellent time to kind of submit that input. NodeCon can be a single event in that it doesn't need all of the initial nodes to attend in order for it to be successful. We can use some secure number, say 50% of the initial nodes that run the network to have a successful NodeCon. And then we have protocols which will extend the membership state of the network from that initial membership established at NodeCon, but in a virtual fashion. So you wouldn't require further NodeCons in different locations. We haven't talked about that much here, or even in the technical paper, if I'm not mistaken, but we will be releasing more information about how that works in the near future. But yes, we would love to hold it somewhere warm and sunny. We're currently in the Caymans, for our research group is located in the Caymans, and that seems like it would be an ideal place to hold something like this. But yeah, so in summary, it can be a single event. It could be multiple events. Currently, we're planning on it being just a single event. We'd like it to coincide with some other major event in the space. So we're not forcing people to travel somewhere for just one small thing. Not to say that this is a small thing, but that would kind of give you value for what is undoubtedly a potentially expensive trip for some people. So yeah, in summary, yeah, we would like it to be one location, one place, but we are open to discussion on this.
So we've been asked by Jericho, how can precomputation keep up with activities in the network? What is the bulk 99% that's precomputed and the minute remainder computed as the transaction happens? So this is a little technical. So essentially what the precomputation is we actually run through the same process as real time, except we do it under what's called a partially homomorphic encryption. So I need to talk about CMIX itself. So in CMIX, what actually is occurring is as messages pass through the network, they have algebraic encryption multiplied in, and this encryption is commutative. And it's really important because you can add some, remove some, and do it in any order. So this encryption which is multiplied in is encryption which was previously agreed to. And what that agreement results in is it results for each slot in the final total encryption that's added, but the precomputation process doesn't allow that to be broken apart into subcomponents. So while you have the total encryption, you can't figure out what is added when and break the permutations. So essentially, the precomputation does the same process with a null input, because the algebraic, in this case, null input is 1. But you can't use these same algebraic codes more than once. They're effectively one-time pads. So what we do is we do it under partially homomorphic encryption, which is based on an encryption scheme called Elgamal, which carries its core cryptographic primitive from exponentiation, modular exponentiation inside of a cyclic group. And that's essentially what it's doing. It's doing a lot of exponentiations and a lot of multiplications. We've got more detail in the in the Elixir architecture paper, and there's further detail in the initial academic paper on CMIX. As well as you can ask more questions on the Discord. I'm there on a fairly regular basis. Hopefully that answered it. It's a pretty complex question.
Great, thanks, Ben. Got a question from Mark about can USA developers participate in the XX network What are the parameters around that? And I think the answer is yes. Mark was asking about an exclusion for US persons for the initial public sale. So that applies specifically to this initial public sale. But our hope, obviously, is that over the longer term, everyone in the world will be able to fully participate in the XX network. And so we're hoping to have more details to fill in on that in the future. But, for example, folks in the US can download the XX Collective app, get access to the XX Messenger, the messaging app that we have available. And so, again, our goal is for this to be something that's available to everyone.
All right, so we have another question. This one's about the inflationary block reward approach that we use, and specifically why we chose to use inflationary rewards. I think we're going to have a webinar in the future that kind of talks about our tokenomics in a little more detail, as well as a paper. So I won't go into too much detail here other than to say, especially in the early network, it's extremely important for our nodes to be robust and performant. And the alternative to an inflationary model, say maybe a transaction fee model, would be expensive to the initial users, which would hurt adoption of the platform. But it would also kind of make the initial revenue stream or the initial compensation stream for nodes who run the network unreliable. And so that's kind of in the face of what we're trying to establish, which is a stable community of nodes, so that our network grows and becomes robust. So that's why we chose inflationary. It keeps the rewards more stable. It is a dynamic inflationary model. Again, I won't go into too much detail on why it's dynamic or how the inflation changes and what the mechanisms are to change the inflation. But inflation is expected to be quite low. So it's short answer, it's to kind of seed a robust and stable network of nodes.
I want to add to that answer just that this wasn't chosen lightly, but there's a series of different papers discussing the economics of inflationary versus not, and our read of them essentially that inflationary long-term supports stability of the networking of the economics. And when we bring out the token economics paper and discuss that in the third webinar, we will go into more detail on the specifics. I guess we'll answer this question about the XX Messenger and secure payments. The XX Messenger, as it currently stands, is kind of our test bed, and we've not made a strong commitment to what it's going to look like in the future. We expect that there will be a combined payments messaging app accessible for the network, but I don't think we can commit at this time at the specific way it's going to look. I'd like to point out that in some ways the answer is yes, because the XX Messenger is split into two components internally. One is what we call the client library, and that is where the encryption and the cryptography lies. And that will, of course, eventually support payments and have complete support for all functionality of the network. It's a component we've talked about as the Arrow SDK. The specific app itself, although I don't think we can commit to its future at this time.
Yeah, and part of our hope, to Ben's point, is that we're going to see a lot of third-party developers building out these capabilities for users under different use cases. And so David asked a question here about how to get to the Arrow SDK, saying that he applied and didn't hear back. And so first of all, I apologize for not being more direct in replying to you here, David. So Ben and his team are building the Arrow SDK, and as he said, a lot of that build out has been tied to the development of the XX Messenger. We kind of treated that like an internal, internal separation between, the team building the XX network and the team building the messenger. And, how do we structure the tools available to the Messenger team in a way that we can then hand off to any third-party developer with the Arrow SDK. We expect to be rolling this out quite soon, and Ben can speak to the details around the Arrow SDK. But kind of the main constraint on us right now is simply the bandwidth of our developer team, where we'd love to put this out to 500 developers all at once, but then we just literally would grind to a halt answering good questions from 500 developers. And so we're in the process of building out these tools, starting to build out documentation. But I think we're going to be reaching out to developers, those who've sent in an application through our website pretty soon. And Ben might have a little bit more detail to add on that as well.
Yeah, we've been a little delayed in getting this out. Some aspects of it didn't progress as we expected. We'll have more information available soon. We apologize.
Okay, I'm going to address another question. This one is, can you please differentiate between the XX coin and Praxis? And the short answer here is that the XX coin is based, or I guess I should say the reverse. The Praxis team has developed the technology behind the XX coin and is the primary developer for the code base that enables the XX coin. The XX coin itself is just it's a currency that's running on the XX network. And again, that XX network is comprised of technology from both Praxis and Elixir. So Praxis provides the currency, the blockchain code, as well as the consensus code. And Elixir is providing the communications layer, the privacy aspect of things. And so I guess that's the easiest way to kind of describe what the difference is here. Basically, XX coin is based on technology and code that's been developed by Praxis.
Great. So Andrea asked a question about how are the 600 BetaNet nodes selected? What was the criteria? So the BetaNet node selection process ran from January through June of this year. And so those 600 nodes have been selected. And it was a process where we first put a survey out to our community saying, what are the criteria? What are the key qualifications that you'd like to see from nodes? We got that feedback. We then had an application open for a couple of months, mostly using those criteria as articulated by our community for the questions on that application. There were a few base level, do you think you can run a server with at least these capabilities? What is your internet connection speed that you think you're going to be able to have at your physical location? And again, this was a process where we were hoping for maybe 100 or 200 decent applications, but we were blown away. I think it was a total of 870 applications from more than 80 countries. And so we had kind of a tough choice, and we ultimately said, well, let's find a way to work with everyone who's got a good application. And so we've got this set of 600. They're going to be set up to get started here with the BetaNet. We'll be giving them a kind of timeline for here's when you need to confirm that you're ready to go ahead and participate. Here's a final list of specifications for the server they'll be asked to purchase, or whether it's physical or whether it's a cloud-based setup. But it's a spread. There's going to be some node operators who are already running nodes for several other networks. There's also some kind of first-time players that are excited to get involved. Again, part of our vision for the XX network, if this is truly a decentralized worldwide operation, if this is so complicated and hard that only 5 people in the world can really run an XX network node, then that's not fulfilling our vision. And so, it's not going to be something that requires deep expertise. And so it's, those 600 have been selected. But as I said, for the mainnet, we expect thousands of nodes, and they're ultimately going to be chosen through the governance process. And so we hope that these betanet nodes, through their investment of time, their investment of effort, will be in a good position to be part of that mainnet. But there's still going to be a lot of opportunities for folks who are just now kind of coming on board to participate as a node operator. And we're excited to work with them going forward.
Okay, so I'm going to answer two quick questions here from the same person. And the first one is there a mechanism for currency transactions to be refunded? Currently, there is no envisioned way to process, a refund, as you might call it, I guess, in centralized platforms. If there is an error in sending a transaction, generally you would require the recipient of the transaction to actually send you the money back. And this is kind of a symptom of decentralization, right? You don't want to allow a centralized organization to reverse transactions. And so, yes, unfortunately and fortunately, all transactions are final, just like every other blockchain. And so if you require a refund, that would be something you would have to work out with the recipient of the money. And generally that shouldn't be a huge issue. If it's a merchant, for example, there's reputation at stake here. They're not going to, and that's really what I think is key to ensuring like a decentralized private marketplace is successful is a reputation-based kind of economy. And so, their reputation is on the line. If there is an honest mistake, I'm assuming that's why you would want a refund, then, it's in their best interest to process that refund for you. But there is no cryptographic way currently envisioned to enforce a refund. And that's mainly because there's no centralized person in place to determine whether a refund is valid or, is due. So the second question is, are offline currency transactions possible on the XX network? This is an interesting question. I would say at first, no, you have to be online and submit the transaction for the coins to be moved into your account or, moved over to your key, which is kind of a more accurate way of saying it. However, if you absolutely wanted to, and I don't necessarily recommend it, but we can think more about this, ways of enabling this. You could hand your private key for a coin over to someone. And this is actually kind of at the heart of what David first envisioned, I think even back in the eCash days with the nominated coins, when he called them digital bearer instruments. And the notion there was like, you could actually just hand over control of a coin to someone without even being online. And you do that essentially by handing them the private key that controls that coin. Obviously there's risk involved, right? Because if now you have two people that own the private key and there's nothing, once you hand it over to someone, they technically have access to that account, but then it becomes a race. The first person who goes online and moves that money will end up being the actual owner of that currency. So there's some complexities involved with doing offline transactions. I won't say that it's impossible. It's generally speaking not recommended. But I'll think more about this, and maybe this might be an interesting blog post at some point in the future.
Okay, so we've been asked what's to stop the big institutions, i.e. US government, stopping this new privacy coin getting into the mainstream. This is a complex question, and I don't think we can answer it to full satisfaction right now. But Essentially, up to this point, the United States government has at least been reasonably amenable to the privacy coins that exist, and in some ways to cryptocurrencies as a whole. They've not outright gone and shut them down. Based on the current laws, it's our belief that we should be able to continue, and we've designed our network to be as decentralized and unmanipulatable as possible. It's always possible for the United States government to actively criminalize participation, and that's fundamentally true about any cryptocurrency. So I don't know that we face particularly different difficulties here versus other currencies that have been created. As we go forward, I think that when we learn more about the perspective of the United States government or other large institutions, we might learn more and answers might change. But that's what we've got at this time.
And just tagging in there real quick, I think Ben's absolutely right. And then one further aspect is, the technology we've developed has been developed with, as we mentioned during the presentation, robustness in mind, even against nation state adversaries. So they have regulatory ways of kind of preventing mainstream adoption, but also, more, aggressive ways of preventing it, maybe by attacking the network, making the network unreliable, attacking the operators of the network. And we've tried to make the technology that supports this at least address that second issue by making it as robust as possible against nation state adversaries.
Great. So we got an anonymous attendee asking, will these webinars be posted to YouTube or some other platform? The answer is yes. I think the first one's either up or maybe we were kind of waiting for this one. We got some feedback that we sounded a little bit tired on our last webinar. And so, but yes, our intent is to have these live. We realize that we have supporters in different time zones all around the world. And so, we're doing some of these at 2 a.m. GMT and some of them at 2 p.m. GMT, but we want to catch as many people as possible. And then also, we expect and plan to continue the conversation on social media, especially Discord and Telegram. So yeah, we'll make sure that we get the webinar video feed posted probably to YouTube here as soon as we can.
So we've been asked if there's a plan for smart contract language. On our Discord, we've discussed some potential ideas in the future. But as of right now, a smart contract language has not been announced to the XX network, simply because there's a lot of stuff on our plate. We're working on some proposals for this and hope to put more information out soon. But as you can imagine, the scale and scope of a project like this is quite large, and to get to completion, or at least initial launch, it's very important to minimize your feature set, minimize what you're delivering. There's some projects there that promise the world, and what's really going to happen is that you can't offer the world at once. There's only so much development over time and so much that you can develop simultaneously. So, our fundamental answer to this is not that we've announced, but we hope to. Then another question has been, the participation in the beta net phase will be a technical challenge for node runners. Will it be profitable? So a term that our AlphaNet node operators have referred to our operation as has been the Cadillac of node deployment. And what they mean by that is we use something called Terraform to do the deployment. And essentially it's a fairly trivial process. You have to enter in a few commands via command line, then it runs. And then it's mostly self-managing. We've actually not had to have a single one of our node operators redeploy in, I believe, 3 months. So our goal is to have very, very highly polished node deployment tools, and I think we've achieved that. Part of our belief is that if that only highly technical individuals are capable of deploying nodes, then that's going to limit the scope of who's going to run nodes and fundamentally limit decentralization. So it's been very important for us to provide easy-to-use tools, and we'll continue to do so. As to the profitability, we hope so. We've not yet announced rewards for BetaNet nodes. we're actively working on this, and I think there'll be an announcement in the future. And I believe it will be profitable, but obviously, even when we announce it, we can't make promises.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the technical challenge, our main feedback from AlphaNet nodes has been that running an XX network node is pretty boring, which we take as kind of a compliment here. And so again, our goal is for this to be accessible to folks with a broad range of levels of technical skills.
Hey there, I'm going to address the question about the comparison of Elixir and Manero. So first of all, I just want to point out that it's always a pleasure for us to see that there are other privacy projects in the space, because we value this a lot, and it's very good to see that there are other entities out there that care about this. This is a very tricky question, and I would say it is superior, but I might be biased. But let me deconstruct this whole thing for you, and I'll let you decide. So I believe that in the end of the day, this will be a user decision. But for example, compared to Manero, we have quantum security. So you have actually long-term security. Our consensus is way more friendly. It scales more. We don't have any type of forking every period of time to prevent to compete against the ASICs. If you just get the latest state update, you know exactly what coins you have or not. And having to go through the actual blockchain and see which transactions are for you. So there's a lot of access there when it comes to privacy projects. We went for the best privacy we can get with the best usability. So in the end of the day, I will say that's more than up to you, but I believe we are superior, yes. We will be probably writing a blog post on this, because this is a question we get asked a lot. So we'll be able to deconstruct the whole thing so that people actually see it and then are able to make the decision based on the data out there.
Okay, so I'm going to answer the next question, which is, so I'm going to paraphrase. For Bitcoin, unlike for Bitcoin, not anyone can become a mainnet node. And because of this, how is it expected that someone can make plans to spin up a node, since they may or may not be selected to become a node by governance? So the first question is, or I guess the first statement is in fact true, with some caveats. Basically, anyone is invited to apply to become a node. However, in order to mitigate the presence of Sybils in our network, because we don't use proof of stake or proof of work, which in many ways has been proven to create centralized power structures in its pursuit of decentralization, we need some other mechanism in order to prevent people from just spinning up as many nodes as they want and taking over the network. And we have chosen to use community governance to do this. And we believe this is a particularly powerful approach, especially in combination with some of the governance mechanisms that we described during the presentation, particularly incentivizing the community to actually participate in governance. So you're not waiting for weeks on end for enough people to show up to make a vote either way. So we are expecting that the community governance approach will be dynamic and robust enough to ensure that anyone who wants to become a node can kind of sufficiently convince the community that they're not a Sybil or some organization trying to control a massive number of nodes, and that they have the capability of successfully running a node, as in, they can prove maybe the hardware requirements have been met. We're pretty confident that the community governance and incentives mechanisms will enable you to become a node. I don't know if Ben has any further input on this, but that's basically how I would address this.
I don't have much. You've got it pretty well. The goal isn't particularly to limit the number of nodes in the network. The network performs better with more nodes, and we want to incentivize the addition of nodes. The primary goal here is, again, against Sybil and to ensure the cryptographic properties of the mixing teams, which work differently and as a result have fundamentally different attack surfaces than standard blockchains. My expectation is that this can scale to the scale of most modern blockchains. So and as a result of, at least initially, entrance will not be particularly difficult. So we've been asked, can small IoT devices leverage our SDK? It needs an internet connection, right? I assume our SDK has a very small footprint. Fundamental answer to this is yes. So our SDK is written in Go, and it's compiled. And Go's not the fastest language, but it's no slouch either. Right now, so let me take this back. So the fundamental cryptography that an RSDK implementer does on a regular basis is relatively efficient. So there's a small number of public key operations when setting up and a small number of public key operations when creating initial end-to-end links. But after that, it's just hashing. So a relatively low power device will be capable of running the RSDK. And it has a relatively small footprint. I believe right now our compiled binaries of RSDK are 8 to 9 megabytes in size. And most of that is kind of Go code and Go's runtime engine. And we successfully compiled it across a bunch of different architectures, x86, ARM, it's one or two others. I don't remember which ones. As we progress, I think it'll get smaller and smaller footprints. There's the process for retrieving messages currently is a polling architecture, which will change to be more socket-based as time goes on. But ultimately, yes, I think that RSDK will support IoT devices and is relatively low power.
Thanks, Ben. And so we also have a question from Mark asking, in addition to the XX network orientation, will this webinar series clearly illustrate the initial steps or resources for either a potential dApp developer or a node operator to get started? And I would say, we hadn't envisioned that being part of this current webinar series, but on the other hand, by the end of this month, hopefully we'll be pretty good at doing these webinars. And so I think it's a good idea. And again, our goal is to make this pretty accessible to anyone who's interested in being part of the XX network, whether they're a developer, whether they're a node operator. And so I think, yeah, in addition to printed materials, documentation, formats like this one could be useful for participants who want to be part of it. And so I think that's a good idea, and we'll look into that. And so looks like there's one or maybe two more questions. I think we're going to want to kind of cap this off at about 90 minutes. So these might be the last couple of questions for us to answer.
All right, so I'll go ahead and take the first one. The question is, for node operators, is the block append mechanism, the the XX consensus, computationally expensive? If not, what is the mentioned hardware requirements referred to? And the short answer to this is it is more expensive than, in some ways, than CMIX, and in other ways less expensive. It's hard to say what is computationally expensive. It's all relative. We do have, and this is mentioned, I believe, in the white paper, fairly strict hardware requirements, especially initially, for nodes to meet in order to become a node. And that is because they are running essentially at least two software libraries in parallel. That is the CMIX privacy layer, as well as the consensus mechanism. You could also say they're also running the payments library, which is in charge of verifying the signatures for transactions. And so it's running a lot of things in parallel, and that requires a certain level of computing performance. So I wouldn't say this is necessarily computationally expensive, especially if you compare it to some of the servers that are required to run centralized platforms. But there are strict hardware requirements, especially initially. Following, mainnet launch, it will be up to the community to define these requirements. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Hey, Will, this is Peter, and just to chime in on that, we published sort of a draft set of requirements for the BetaNet nodes back in January, and we're going to come back with a finalized set of requirements soon, early in the new year. They're going to probably pretty closely mirror what that projection was. And what we're looking at is a server, the CPU, 8 or 16 cores, not that exotic of a selection. We are looking for more of a high-end GPU, graphics processing unit. But we expect overall that machine, if you're going to build a physical server, $1,500, $1,600 in that ballpark. And so that's, again, we will come back early in the new year with a finalized set of requirements for the BetaNet. And then, of course, as Will mentioned, for the mainnet, governance will make those decisions, but we think, we don't expect things to get very out of line from those BetaNet requirements.
So we've been asked about the Node software, what language it's programmed in, and if it's going to be open sourced. So the Node software is primarily written in Go. We're currently using Go version 1.3. And there is a section written, then we have our deployment code written in Terraform, and then we have some more management code written in Python. The one other component is that we use C++ along with some special libraries on depending on hardware for GPU utilization. That's pretty much the bulk of it. Go is a pretty good language for us. It's relatively efficient, and those parts which need to be sped up can be brought in. You can use either C assembly, and it's very good at multi-threading, which we heavily utilize. It's a highly parallelized process. As to open sourcing, fundamentally, yes, a form of open sourcing will occur. We're hoping to get some stuff out soon, although we can't make any promises at this time. But fundamentally, yeah, this type of software can't be trusted if it isn't open source. We don't expect anyone to trust it. We expect people to read the code, evaluate it, and to make it available for the public.
Great. Thank you, Ben. So we're at 90 minutes here. I think we're going to wrap up the conversation for today. But first of all, thank you so much for those of you who have joined us live here. And we invite you to continue the conversation on our Discord and Telegram channels. You should find links to those on the Elixir and the Praxis websites. And then also, please join us for our next webinar, which is going to be coming up in 2.5 days here. So it's 2 a.m. GMT, a Friday morning if you're in the Eastern Hemisphere, a Thursday evening if you're in the Western Hemisphere. And that's going to be the first conversation where we're doing more of a deep dive into the consensus mechanisms. And so we look forward to that. But again, thank you so much for joining us. And this should conclude the webinar unless any of my other panelists have any other wrapping up notes.
No, just thank you for showing up and being involved. And like Peter said, we will be having a more technical webinar that the Praxis team will be heavily involved in, as well as Ben, in the next 2 days. So we recommend everyone who's interested in how the technology works to go ahead and attend that one.